clearly we're all here because it's a high growth market, and many of the analysts are anticipating, at a minimum 50 billion devices and over 19 trillion in total market value in the next 3 years. So that it's pretty impressive in terms of growth, and we're here because we want to participate in that. The other, I think, important key point in terms of what my organization is doing, more than half of that is anticipated to be best suited for LPWAN connectivity. Okay, figured out how to use the device. So Senet is committed to the LoRaWAN standard, and LoRaWAN is a open global standard for carrier grade, low power, wide area network connectivity. It's unlicensed spectrum, but Senet as a company is an FCC certified provider of LPWAN services. Big differentiation in terms of LoRaWAN versus other competing technologies. It's an open ecosystem. The LoRaWAN Alliance has gone from 20 members to nearly 500 in the last 3 years. This type of deployment brings TCO that is significantly lower than other options, particularly cellular. And I think one of the key points, there's been I think a lot of discussion at this conference around LTE and LTE5 and NB-IoT. LoRaWAN is available today. Okay, so if you are actively looking to deploy IoT services, and those services are appropriate for a low power network, we can make that happen now. The other kind of key points here in terms of how LoRaWAN works, it is appropriate for bidirectional communication. So it's not just a sort of monitoring connectivity solution, it's also a control solution. And it really addresses more use cases than any other LPWAN technology that's out there. So just to give you a kind of a snapshot of some of the coverage, we've made a very aggressive effort in the last sort of 12 months to really fill out coverage in some major metropolitan areas to support smart city deployments. But we work very actively and very aggressively with our vertical solution partners to build out network in areas where there isn't coverage today. But today we're covering 225 cities, both large and small, over 23 states, and that coverage supports about 50 million people today. And as I say, we can move quite fast in terms of deploying network. We recently lit up a network in Florida in no more than about 3 days, and that's from implementing the gateways and into actually doing testing to validate that we could pick up the devices. So just to talk a little bit about use cases, and there's a whole host of different use cases. But when we look at smart cities, campuses, building environments, there's a variety of different types of use cases that are being deployed that are very appropriate for LPWAN. Some of which is tied to infrastructure monitoring, parking solutions, waste management. We have a number of different partners that are doing smart trash bins, pest control, groundwater management, water metering. There's a whole host of these types of applications, and they tend to revolve around fairly mundane activities, but at the end of the day, they're quite important and yield significant ROI. So why is this important, right? In the smart city environment, by 2050, it's anticipated that 70% of the population will actually live in cities, and that's a fairly significant mega trend. 40 million adults, age 65 and over, will be living alone, right? Which means the notion of monitoring for healthcare purposes and for the elderly becomes an important application. Energy use, right? It is not just about climate change, but also about efficiencies to be gained in terms of how we consume energy. In the Northeast and frankly the northern half of the country, the large urban areas are largely powered by hot water, by steam. the amount of steam lost, right, in today's current infrastructure can be as much as 25%. And that's just based on, you know, technology not really being up to speed in terms of being able to monitor the infrastructure that supports that. So anyways, you get the picture here. So some sample sort of use cases here, and this is, I think this kind of talks to what we're seeing in terms of how projects and are evolving, at least in terms of our business as a connectivity provider. A lot of times it starts with a smart building application. And so we'll have a sort of a vertical use case, and you know, it might be involved in hot water management, for example, right? And steam management. That will tend to evolve towards the infrastructure would then be in place. So we would have either already had macro coverage in place, or we will implement coverage in order to help support that application. That drives a scenario where you can now add additional applications onto that network at very, very low cost, right? And ultimately, over time, that yields a smart city in a very kind of organic way. Now, obviously, there's also a lot of municipalities that are starting to trying to drive these initiatives, but what we're seeing is that oftentimes what triggers their strategic planning is tied to what's already available, right? And so that's kind of an interesting dynamic that we're seeing in space. So, so facility monitoring, right? You know, if you can actually start to deploy solutions that will monitor air quality control, lighting, temperature, you know, those kinds of things. We have partners that are developing sensors that will allow you to manage and monitor whether or not, you know, people are smoking cigarettes in a public area, right? And to be able to take action against that. There's obviously partners that are doing parking type solutions. I think there was a reference in one of the earlier slides that in San Francisco, you know, a huge amount of the carbon footprint is tied to people just driving around trying to find a place to park, right? So it's not just about energy consumption, but it's also about you know, quality of life in general. So infrastructure monitoring, and I kind of made reference to this before, but you know, particularly in the north, you have huge inefficiencies in terms of how heat is delivered in major urban areas, and you know, by putting in a very low-cost LoRa-based network and low-cost sensors, you can have a dramatic impact on that. We're working with a university right now that you know, spends in the neighborhood of $25 million a year in energy costs. More than half of that is steam, and at least 25% of that is just wasted, based on failures of parts of that infrastructure. So there isn't, you know, there's huge ROI to be had here in terms of just pure energy savings. Okay. Smart parking I mentioned, right? So these deployments are just sort of getting started now. Big impact on just quality of life and reduced gas consumption. And then waste management, right? You know, there's not only the benefit of reducing truck rolls, but just overall efficiency in terms of keeping the environment cleaner and actually deploying trash collection to certain specific areas when it actually is needed, rather than just on a schedule. And groundwater management, last I think but not least. So there's a huge issue within the whole groundwater management and water monitoring space that is tied to non-revenue-based water. There's a huge amount of waste and leakage in our infrastructure, and so not only do you potentially create a more sustainable environment, but there's actually real money to be saved by the utilities, by the water utilities, right? So just to kind of wrap this up, it really is, LoRaWAN in particular is really the broadest ecosystem that's available. It's an open ecosystem. and allows for the greatest number of sensor deployments that are available today. Battery life, we didn't spend a lot of time talking about that, but that's a significant factor. If I go back to the water monitoring example, if you have a water system that's running through an urban area, and you have a failure in a pipe, if you know about that, right, and can have a battery that lasts for 5 years or more, your opportunity to actually generate genuine savings is significant. If you have to dig up the street to replace the battery, right, your ROI goes away fairly quickly. Okay, and again, secure two-way communications, that's a big sort of key point with LoRaWAN. And I think that's it. I think we'll wrap it up there and see if there's questions.
Do we have any questions from the audience? I'd like to hear more about the 3-day deployment in Florida. What exactly were they deploying? What were they measuring?
So it's actually going to be a combination of things. There will be trash collection as part of it. We also will be doing pest control as part of it. And then there's some energy management elements to it as well.
How do you monitor for pests exactly?
Well, so there are companies, I didn't know this until I got into this industry, but there are companies that are actually putting sensors in rat traps and mouse traps, and the whole economics of that kind of a solution absolutely require a low power, low cost network, right? Because it's, you have to be sort of in a scenario where you're going to be delivering a service at sub $1 per device per month kind of a set of financial metrics.
Okay. Now, how wide of an area can be served by one of your base stations?
Well, so we're not in the hardware business ourselves.
Yeah.
But depending on the type of gateway or base station, it could be anywhere from 30 or more miles, and again, that depends on the geography as well, to in-building coverage in a facility.
Okay. All right. Great. And you showed us 6 cities that you said you're working with. So in some of these cities, are there several companies providing maybe different parts of a smart city solution?
Yes, in fact, it's an open ecosystem, so we have a number of partners, and I think the early phases of our business have revolved around vertical solutions, and more often than not, a vertical solution that's delivered by a solution provider into a utility, for example. But what we're seeing in the smart city environment is more and more of a requirement for horizontal applications, where it really requires a systems integrator that's going to go in and provide a variety of different applications, the connectivity, which is where we come in, and platforms that would allow for dashboards, data analytics, and so forth.
Okay, all right, great. Now, John, one of the most interesting things I thought you said was that a lot of times a city's strategic initiative depends on what's already available. Can you kind of give us a concrete example of that? Yeah,
so we have situations today in certain urban environments where the municipality, the political entity, is information gathering, going through fairly extensive RFI processes and trying to figure out how they're going to sort of best serve the civic needs of their constituents. And more than once, we've been able to sort of let them know that you actually have a water monitoring company that's already tied into your city government that could be a use case that would help drive additional applications, right? So in other words, the network's already there. Let's go come up with some additional ideas that could help drive the value that you're looking for.
Okay, all right, great. And would you say there's one application that you think is sort of poised for the most growth in the months ahead?
So everyone always asks that question.
Sorry.
What's the killer app, right? And our running joke right now is, well, it's the rat traps, right? Da-dun-dun. Okay, sorry. That's a really difficult one as well, because there is no killer app in this business, in my opinion. We have what we believe to be very strong value propositions, particularly in energy management. And I talked a lot about heat and steam power and so forth. And that's simply because the actual volume of devices tied into that infrastructure is so large. It is millions and millions of devices just in New York City alone, right? And so that seems quite compelling simply because the ROI is so significant. The amount of actual inefficiency that exists right now that can be impacted is very, very significant. At the same time, there's, you know, all kinds of very positive things happening in terms of efficiencies to be gained in the water, you know, in the water space, right?
Have any of the cities that you've worked with put a dollar value on any of their savings that they've generated?
The use case I mentioned before with the university, I think they anticipate a bare minimum of $10 million a year in savings.
Really? That's quite significant. All right, that's great. All right, any other questions for John? Yeah.
So can you hear me? Can you manage your own network?
Yes, we are a network provider. We've built our own network application server, OSS, BSS. That's a big, we've gotten out of sort of building our own hardware, our own gateways, because it's not a synergistic business for us, and there's lots of folks doing that. But we have a significant amount of intellectual property tied into our OSS.
Okay. All right. How do you interface or collaborate or work with other private networks that are out there? LoRaWAN networks. They talk about they'll be.
So we are absolutely open to partnerships in the private network space, so particularly if they're LoRaWAN networks. There would absolutely need to be some integration work done to support that on the back end, but we know we're very open to that kind of collaboration.
Okay, so that's not something you do right now. They talk about these different private networks being connected on the back end. So is that high on your list or low on your list?
So I would say it's opportunistic.
All right. Other questions for John Nye, Senet? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.